Thanks for your patience. Our final speaker in this track is a longtime open source contributor and enthusiast with a strong background in operating infrastructure at scale. At VEXXHOST, he helps customers build strong, reliable platforms which deliver VMs, Kubernetes, bare metal, and more within their on-premise infrastructure. Please welcome Mohammed Nasser to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can all hear me well. So first of all, I'll speak on behalf of everyone. This room is freezing, so I'll try and hopefully get warmed up soon. So today, the goal of my talk today is to talk a little bit, focus more about operationalizing Teleport and how to use it kind of more in an operational aspect. So diving into a little bit of the challenges that we ran into of actually getting it to run in production and how we use it on a day-to-day basis. And so that's kind of a bit of the focus of the talk today. And so I'll start with a brief intro. So I've been a contributor to open source for quite a long time. Been around for the OpenStack world for maybe 14, maybe 13, 14 years by now. Been around also in the Kubernetes sector. So I've served at the OpenStack Technical Committee. I've served as a chair of the OpenStack Technical Committee. I've been on a board of the Open Infra Foundation. So I've done my fair bit of stuff around open source. And through that, I'm also involved with the Cluster API SIG, which gets you a really neat way of getting Kubernetes clusters inside of OpenStack or any other system. And really let's say the thing that I'm focused on a day-to-day basis is helping our customers do make the best of what they can with their on-prem infrastructure, or either building kind of clouds that live inside of our data centers or inside of theirs, and so on. So just a quick brief about VEXXHOST and our main kind of product, Atmosphere. So Atmosphere essentially is an open source project and allows you to get infrastructure as a service. So essentially, the idea is to really, in some form, let's say, be able to get your own AWS or your own Azure within the premise of your own hardware. And so essentially, the project has a huge focus on security and trust, because essentially that's one of the biggest reasons why people are using this solution. So for example, we got customers in like the medical industry, we got customers in highly compliant industries, and so that's a big reason of why we have to think of security when we're doing all of this. So essentially, like, we do a lot of things in security. If you're kind of familiar with more recent kind of things around signing container images, and so we do a lot of that stuff of even pulling signed images and signing our own images that we ship them out to customers and things like that. So we do a lot of that to just make sure that the whole supply chain is safe. But that's not just everything. We also need to make sure that we have a pretty good way of accessing those customers' workloads. Also, what's neat is we have a public cloud that essentially is a multi-tenant version of Atmosphere that anyone can use. And then we got private clouds, either in our own data centers or customers' data centers that we run for them. So that's kind of like the spiel of what we do. And now I'll talk a little bit about how we use Teleport inside VEXXHOST. So essentially, it's a really important tool for us to access all of the infrastructure that we have. We're a company that is very distributed. We've got employees as far as like Taiwan and Brazil and North America and Europe. And so because we're all over the place, we really need to make sure we have a way of being able to safely manage identity so that when we're onboarding new people, it's very easy to give them access to things and know what they have access to and what they don't have access to. And that's one of the things that are important for us. We wanted to get rid of the whole SSH private key file that people were pasting, and that's not really a solid way of managing identity. But also, you don't want to do YubiKeys and whatnot, because you don't also have a good way of inventorying that. So essentially, with Teleport, it helps us provide a really easy way of managing the entire fleet of all of our systems, all directly inside of it. So all the Kubernetes clusters that we use to run our infrastructure are all exposed there. All of the servers that we run inside our infrastructure are all exposed there. And all the internal applications, which is just things like for bare metal provisioning or anything like that, are all in there. And so we're pretty happy with the approach that Teleport takes. There's a lot of really new improvements that we're seeing. For example, device trust is a really exciting one for us, because then we're able to really fully lock down users to their specific devices. So for MacBook and Windows Hello users, we can lock them down to that system specifically. But obviously implementing this comes with a couple challenges. And the first one to think about is because of the way that we operate, everything has to be on-prem. We can't use cloud for any of that stuff. And so we have to self-host Teleport. We have to do it in a in a way that's geo-redundant. So there's a lot of challenges that it brings to the table. And so pretty much like I was talking about earlier, the first challenge is managing identity across all systems. So the thing is, Teleport lets you enter a system, but however, it doesn't really take care too much of the user that you have inside that system. You still need to have users provisioned for people to log into them. And for us, the idea of exposing the Ubuntu user or EC2 user, as cloud users might be comfortable with, that's not something that really works for us. Teleport has the concept of these ephemeral users that it can create and delete. But for us, that's something that kind of doesn't work too much, mainly because of the fact that we want to be able to still have normal users. We want those users to persist their state. And we want to know that these users can still technically log in via SSH or directly on console or some other way. Still, that needs to be possible. So the current state of things is essentially the only way to access systems is going through Tailscale, which we use, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, as to kind of build a mesh for all of our Teleport infrastructure to go through. And the users are created and managed via Ansible. And I was talking with some folks earlier. So since we expose SSH still, but you're not supposed to use it, certain people can have their keys in there as kind of like a break glass kind of thing. And so for us, we have actually a PAM module that we installed on all of our systems. So if you log in directly via SSH, it sends a notification and even posts something on Slack and a bunch of other places say, hey, somebody logged in directly via SSH. So that way, we still don't lose the ability to be able to directly SSH to systems, but we don't kind of lose sight of people who could be SSHing into systems when they shouldn't be doing it directly. The second challenge is actually building a geo-redundant Teleport cluster. So we took the approach of having a singular cluster that has everything. While we took the approach of having multiple clusters and federate between them, the challenge with that is just discoverability would be really hard. When we're onboarding someone on the team, it'd be like, okay, go and log into these 14 different Teleport clusters, and you have to be switching from one to another in order to be able to log in. The idea of the federated auth being nice, but the visibility is kind of still limited in scope in that sense. So that kind of pushed us towards having one large deployment. But with that, obviously, we couldn't leave that deployment in a singular region. So we pretty much built out a Teleport cluster that spans across all of our data centers. So essentially, one in San Francisco, one in Amsterdam, and one in Montreal. And obviously, it's not pleasant to do that. If you've ever worked with etcd, which is pretty much the only back-end storage for Teleport, etcd requires very low latency for disk writes and network, and we're running it across different continents. So a lot of tuning, but it actually works. It does the job okay. But we're pretty excited at the upcoming feature of where Postgres is supported now as a backend, so that can kind of introduce a lot more of options of typical databases that we can actually run. It's still in preview, but we're hoping that once it gets a little bit more developed, we're able to kind of switch to it. Will we be able to switch to it out of the box? Probably not, so it'll probably be an effort to switch from one backend to another. Another challenge is for the longest time we used Okta as our SSO, but we recently transitioned to Azure AD, which uses SAML out of the box to integrate with Okta with Teleport. And with the OpenID Connect integration, you can actually have multiple redirect URLs. And since we run multiple proxies around the world, you can log into any of those proxies and be redirected to the correct one. So you can have multiple redirect URLs. You unfortunately can't do that when it comes to SAML. So it's actually a single choice of a redirect. So that's been quite limiting, which means that really have to can only authenticate with one of the proxies. So I think there's an open issue in order to kind of solve that or clean that up, but it's probably a lot less trivial than I'm making it out to be. Application access in our experience can also get a little iffy. So sometimes we have users that will be, let's say, based out of in Europe. They're connected to the proxy, teleport proxy that's running in Europe. They're trying to access a resource that is, let's say, in Montreal. Sometimes the redirect works okay, and sometimes it redirects them to the teleport proxy that's in Montreal, and it just doesn't redirect correctly or doesn't sign you in. So it could be probably some small things, but that's kind of one of the challenges when you're having multiple proxies that are all over the place with different host names and things like that. And another small one is, well, actually we'll talk about that maybe more with Tailscale. So on our side, while we have internet connectivity everywhere in our sites, we really wanted to make sure that our teleport environment lives entirely within a scope of a network that we control. And in our case, we have Tailscale. So if you're not familiar, Tailscale is a really great way of building a meshed VPN. It pretty much allows you to communicate between different endpoints. And so it's really cool because it actually builds its own IP network on top of everything in the 100.x range. So that is one of the useful things because it means that we no longer have to worry about reachability from customer systems to any of our teleport proxies or any of our teleport auth servers. We broker that directly through a Tailscale, and since we can use ACLs, we can completely control that flow of traffic so that users can talk to Tailscale nodes only on port 3022, and the Tailscale nodes can only talk to the auth server over this port and really lock it down a lot more. Also, since we work with customers all over the world with different data centers and different users, you can have 6 different customers that are all using 172.16.00/24, and we all know what that hell is like if you have to deal with VPN or anything like that. So by implementing this, we don't ever have to worry about that issue because we have a unique IP address for every single environment in the system. Also, in a sense, this isn't maybe the best security advice, but in a way, that also gives us a way to have kind of a small barrier around our teleport infrastructure so that it's not directly exposed to the internet. So if there is some sort of like 0-day or something like that, we still have some form of gate that you have to jump over to start accessing our teleport infrastructure. So we still have to, we have that kind of perimeter, but it's using a mesh VPN, so it's not the usual, route all the things through a perimeter. So that's kind of the main thing, and essentially before we used to use the IoT mode inside Teleport, which means that the nodes would dial out to the proxy, and then the proxy would broker the whole thing and tunnel it all out. But since we're using Tailscale and we have direct access to everything, we've pretty much decided to drop that and have the systems SSH directly to the nodes that need to have that. And obviously, the one other kind of annoyance by doing that is we can't take advantage of the neat built-in features that gives us let's encrypt SSL certificates because there's no HTTP public access. So we have to do some certbot dances of SSH restarts and all of that to get it to happen with DNS verification. So the other thing is automating deployment. So everything is automated in our organization. Infrastructure is coded is at the heart of everything we do, but we have a challenge that most individuals or most companies don't have, which is we have to deal with physical infrastructure. Physical infrastructure doesn't have an identity tied to it. Physical infrastructure doesn't have a service identity. We don't get an IAM user assigned out of the box when we boot that VM. So it doesn't have any identity. And so that makes it really hard to be able to, let's say, automatically join new systems or new infrastructure to our cluster. And so we have kind of 2 challenges, because step 1, we have to get systems enrolled into Tailscale just so that they can actually communicate with Teleport. And then the challenge number 2 is actually getting systems into Teleport. So for getting into Tailscale, unfortunately, we just have to use a token that expires with time. There's not really much of choices that we can do with that. But the challenge that I think most of us here kind of care about is getting Teleport enrolled, or getting a node enrolled into Teleport. So essentially what we've done is when we boot up a system, we inject an SSH CA certificate. That SSH CA certificate is issued by HashiCorp Vault. And essentially what we do is in our CI operations, when the system starts up and notices that this system is not enrolled inside Teleport, it generates a public and private key pair. It takes that public key and signs it using Vault, and then it's able to SSH using that signed key into the system that has not been enrolled yet inside Teleport. And so by doing that, we're able to kind of add that CA certificate. And also what's really interesting is because we use GitHub Actions, we authenticate to Vault using the GitHub Action OIDC token. So there's no secret token that's being used to log into Vault. We're actually using the GitHub workflow token to actually log into Vault to generate that, that token. And then once we use that token, we're able to get that node enrolled into Teleport. And at that point, for all future operations, we use machine ID. And so what's really neat with machine ID is pretty much we actually have once again, the GitHub Actions workflow use the token that's issued by GitHub to authenticate to Teleport. And actually, that way it gets a bot account, and then it's able to then SSH into the systems and run Ansible or do whatever we need to do for our deployments. So that's kind of the really neat thing is that our whole interaction of our CI/CD infrastructure has no hard-coded secrets at all. We're using the OIDC tokens that are issued from GitHub, and we're taking those and we're authenticating into Teleport with them, and with that, we're going all the way in to do the deployments and do anything we need to do after that. So that's kind of a really, really, really neat development that we managed to get, so we can avoid secrets for this thing. And so essentially now kind of we're in this world of no SSH keys. So that's kind of one of the biggest things we wanted to eliminate. We didn't want to depend on YubiKeys because we don't necessarily can get them anywhere and everywhere in the world. We wanted to know that we can just rely on whatever MFA mechanism that we can enforce inside of our identity provider, whether that was Okta or Azure or whatever it is. We want to have that all enforced there and not have multiple different ways of authenticating into systems. And we use Kubernetes extensively. We run OpenStack on top of Kubernetes as well. And so it's been really, really neat for all of our developers and all of our support staff that they just have a CLI client running and they can just do TSH, kube, ls, and see all the clusters that they can have access to. And they can easily log into any of those clusters without having to worry about what being on the right VPN or being on the right system or SSHing into some other bastion or anything like that. And SSHing into systems is also, very easy. If you don't know which system you want to run into, you can do a TSH ls and point it towards the environment. And we kind of have a small system of how to identify which systems are running in which environment and which region and things like that. And so it's really easy for a user to just come on in and really easily understand what are these systems and what are they for and how to log into them. And again, once again, what's cool is no more bastions, no more jump hosts. We just don't see the purpose for them anymore, so these are completely gone. And obviously, all sessions are recorded, so we can easily audit things. We use access control to provide access or revoke it, or temporary access requests. So there's a lot of really neat things that we have now as a result of this. So what's next? So obviously, it would be silly for me to say everything is perfect. There's always improvements that we can do. So right now we're happy with where we are, but there's still some challenges that we are trying to work out. So we heavily rely on Ansible to drive our deployments. There's open issues regarding Ansible's performance once you're using something like machine ID. The reason for that is because it's running, from what I understand it's running everything through the TSH command. And by doing that, it actually kind of cuts, it pretty much loses all the pipelining improvements and all of that. So that slows things down a bunch, as well as session recording. So if you've ever seen what Ansible does when it runs, it SSHs and then SCPs a Python file and then executes that. And all of that just clogs up your session recordings. So there's some potential ideas of working around this that we've been thinking about, essentially by potentially just generating a certificate and SSHing directly to the Teleport system, so avoiding the TSH command, but that's a little bit a little bit too much to get through. The other thing is the etcd storage backend is a bit limiting. So as I talked about earlier, running etcd at a much larger scale and across many different regions is very tough and can cause a lot of issues. So hopefully we're hoping that with Postgres support comes in and gets a little bit more battle tested, moving on to something like that will make it a lot easier to run our database aspect of things. And in general, Postgres is just easier to interact with rather than something like etcd. And then support for BMCs and switches. So that's one of the things that we feel is kind of important. Right now, there's not an easy way for us to manage controlled access to our fleet of bare metal systems. So let's say somebody wants to log into the BMC of, BMC, iDRAC, ILO, whatever, different brands are calling it. There's not an easy way for us to broker that access through Teleport. And so unfortunately, that's one of the things that we just have to have users go in directly through Tailscale directly onto the system. But that's not something that we want because Tailscale is much more of an always open thing, and we want more of an access request, especially since historically, ILOs and iDRACs are known to be one of the most scariest things to have to be available. Switch access as well. So switches don't have a really easy way of being able to access them. So there's been some work lately with the OpenSSH integration. So there's possibly ways where if you have a modern enough switch, you can have it just trust the CA certificate that Teleport provides. But most out-of-the-box switches are not going to have something that can do that. So it'd be neat to have to explore what could be the alternatives, whether the Teleport proxy could become some sort of SSH that SSHs on your behalf onto those systems or something along those lines, which could be really interesting. And then finally, another one that we were, really cool session today downstairs about kind of, figuring out pain points with Teleport and whatnot. But obviously one of the really interesting ones is this really helps us lock down our on-prem infrastructure. But I mean, there's no avoiding that all of us here rely on some form of SaaS infrastructure. And locking that down, it still continues to be a challenge, right? You've got salespeople using Salesforce, you've got support using Zendesk, and these things are here, but it's hard to control that access to them. And so we were talking about could be interesting if Teleport would have some sort of forward proxy that could broker that access, and then you just set a whitelisted IP or allow listed IP address on those systems so that you can make sure that you only are sending traffic through that system and you're controlling access through that kind of forward proxy. So that way you can kill access to any of your SaaS services. So someone's in your Salesforce and they shouldn't be. When you revoke their tokens, usually that's until the token expires, they still have access. So you have to kind of go around and log them out from all the different services they have access to. If you're brokering it through something like Teleport, you cut their access, they're locked out. That's it, nothing's getting proxied anymore. That's pretty much it. That's the summary of all of our experiences with Teleport. I hope you all appreciated it. And I wanted to open it up if anyone has any questions at all about everything that I mentioned today. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. A round of applause for Mohammed. Any questions from the audience? All right. Got one over here.
Your comments at the end, I found, well, thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. Where you said you're looking at potentially adding new applications or new personas. Currently, right now, is everyone that's utilizing the architect that's getting into your infrastructure, are they all developers? Is that like essentially the one persona that you're supporting now, and then you're looking to support non-technical or non-developer resources in the future? Is that something you're already doing, or is that something that is on the roadmap for the future?
So right now, yeah, it's all just developers and sysadmins, as SREs. Those are the only people that are accessing it. But I think ideally, I would like it for it to be in a world where salespeople can log into Teleport and access what they need to access from there, and that way we know who's going into what, and kind of have an application proxy in that sense. I don't know if Teleport will do this. I would like it if they did, but that's kind of the ideal world for us, which would be really nice.
Question over here. Let me run to the other side of the room.
Get your steps in for today.
I am. Got my watch on. Almost closed my rings.
Hey, really cool presentation. I was just curious if you looked at using OIDC with Azure AD, because that's actually something that we do, and we actually helped get the multiple redirect URL thing working with Teleport.
I think we'd be open to it. I think it's just at the time when we implemented it, the documentation was focused on the SAML, so we kind of figured like maybe that's the better path to go.
I'll tell you, it does work, and it works with the multiple redirect URL thing.
Yeah,
So it should solve that problem.
That would be really neat. And on that note, right, another thing that's been kind of a bit of a challenge, I'm sure you've dealt with it, is the whole, getting all the group UUIDs and mapping them from group UIDs to the roles. And I also expressed that to some people. It'd be nice that we can just grab the roles directly and translate them rather than having that indirection layer. But yeah, that's pretty neat to know. So that's good to know.
Awesome.
For that
Thank
as well.
you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think I saw someone over there.
Yes. Toss the mic to you.
Hey, great presentation, and thank you for coming in today. I think similar to your first answer to the first question, right? At Teleport here, we strive for feedback from customers. And so, things that maybe you've seen on our roadmap or that you've been thinking about, like what else do you see as improvements for Teleport as a product?
I think overall, like we're pretty happy with what it provides, and it solves the base issues that we have. I think as a matter of fact, we've been pretty happy because I feel like you've come up with things that we didn't know we needed. Like we didn't know we needed device trust, and then you bring it on and we're like, actually, we never thought of that. And so I think this continual kind of innovation in kind of the security space. But I think the one thing that I did kind of talk about with some folks was that really, I think, and I hope this is not what the case ends up being, but it feels like sometimes the cloud version is getting not as much, a lot more love than the self-hosted one. And so some of the new stuff, like for example, the identity governance thing that was announced today, somebody had raised a technical question and mentioned that it relied on some sort of AWS service to do that. So then, I don't know yet, I don't want to speculate, but I don't know if that's the kind of thing that'll be like a cloud-only feature, so use AWS, or you got to put in your API keys and it'll integrate all that for you, but just kind of knowing and understanding how that will pan out and giving some of us self-hosted people a bit more love,
Anything else from Mohammed?
Awesome.
No? Okay, round of applause for Mohammed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it.